The massive space station hung in the void like a silver jewel against the stars. It was bigger than most cities back on Earth and had been built specifically for this moment. 12 different alien species had agreed to meet here in neutral space to sign the most important treaty in galactic history. The Universal Peace Accords would decide how the entire galaxy would be divided and ruled for the next 1,000 years. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the human diplomatic ship as it approached the station. He had been in space for 15 years, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of so many alien vessels gathered in one place. Massive pyramid ships belonging to the Altarians floated next to crystal formations that were actually Vorthan spacecraft. Strange, insect-like vessels from the Khazari buzzed between them like metallic wasps. Each ship represented a civilization that had been traveling between stars for thousands of years while humans were still learning to make fire. The human ship looked tiny next to these giants. The USS Enterprise was humanity's best diplomatic vessel, but it was barely the size of a single gun turret on some of the alien ships. Jake tried not to think about what that meant for Earth's chances in these negotiations. Humans had only been in space for 300 years, and most of that time had been spent just figuring out how to travel between their own solar system's planets. Ambassador Lisa Crawford joined him at the viewing window. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes who had spent her whole career trying to get other species to take humanity seriously. Today would be the biggest test of her life. Behind her stood Lieutenant Commander Ryan Blake, their intelligence officer, and Dr. Susan Martinez, their cultural specialist. The entire future of the human race rested on the shoulders of 4 people in a ship that could fit inside an alien shuttle bay. "Remember," Crawford said quietly, "we're here to listen and learn. These species have been doing interstellar politics since before humans discovered agriculture. We need to be humble and grateful that they're including us at all." Jake nodded, but something bothered him about the whole situation. If this was really about peace and cooperation, why did all the alien messages sound more like orders than invitations? Why were humans the only species bringing such a small delegation? Every other race had arrived with dozens of ships and hundreds of representatives. The humans had been told that a small delegation would be more appropriate. For their status as newcomers, the docking procedure took 2 hours because human technology was so primitive compared to alien systems. Jake watched alien ships phase directly through force fields or simply appear inside docking bays using transportation, technology that humans could barely understand. The Enterprise had to wait for a mechanical docking arm to slowly pull them into position like they were still using 20th century methods when they finally entered the station. Jake was amazed by its size. The corridors were wide enough for 3 human ships to fly through side by side. Everything was built on a massive scale to accommodate species that ranged from tiny crystalline beings to enormous gas-based entities. The humans looked like children walking through a cathedral designed for giants. The station's main hall could have held the entire population of a small city. 12 different sections had been designed to accommodate each species' environmental needs. The Altarian area featured perfect geometric patterns and harsh lighting that hurt human eyes to look at directly. The Vorthan section was filled with crystal formations that sang in harmonies no human ear could properly hear. The Khazari zone buzzed with the sound of millions of insect voices speaking in perfect unison. The human section was embarrassingly small. It looked like a hotel lobby compared to the magnificent displays around it. Jake noticed that it was also positioned at the back of the hall, furthest from the central negotiation platform. The message was clear. Humans were here as observers, not as equal participants. The opening ceremony began with each species demonstrating their greatest achievements. The Altarians projected holographic images of their empire spanning hundreds of star systems. Their cities were perfect geometric forms that stretched across entire continents. Not a single building was out of place and not a single citizen stepped out of line. It was order and efficiency beyond human comprehension. The Vorthans created a symphony of light and sound using living crystal formations. They showed how they could reshape matter at the molecular level, turning asteroids into works of art and dead planets into garden worlds. Their technology seemed more like magic than science to human observers. The Khazari demonstrated their perfect unity. Billions of individual beings moved as one mind across thousands of worlds. They could coordinate actions across light years of space with precision that made human military operations look like chaos. When they spoke, millions of voices said exactly the same words at exactly the same time. Each species took their turn, showing why they deserved to rule large portions of the galaxy. The fish-like Aquarians controlled all the water worlds. The energy beings of the Plasma Collective claimed dominion over stellar phenomena. The rock-like Lithians had established mining operations throughout asteroid belts and barren planets. When humanity's turn came, the hall fell silent in a different way. Lisa Crawford walked to the presentation area with a small device that seemed pathetic compared to the incredible displays they had just witnessed. Instead of showing technological marvels or vast empires, she began displaying human art and culture. She showed paintings from Earth's greatest masters, played music that ranged from classical symphonies to folk songs from every continent. She displayed literature and poetry, photographs of human families and festivals, videos of children playing and old people telling stories. The presentation was beautiful, but it seemed so small and primitive. Next to the galactic empires surrounding them, the alien delegates watched politely, but Jake could see them exchanging glances. Some looked amused by humanity's quaint cultural displays. Others seemed bored or confused about why humans would waste time on such trivial matters. The message was clear. Culture and art were nice hobbies, but they had nothing to do with real power or governance. When Crawford finished, there was a brief moment of respectful applause before the aliens returned to discussing serious matters among themselves. Jake felt his heart sink as he realized that everything humans valued most about themselves meant nothing to the species who would decide their fate. The first day ended with humanity clearly established as the junior partner at the table. They were invited to dinner with representatives from other species, but Jake noticed they were seated at smaller tables away from the main discussions. Conversations stopped when humans approached and resumed when they moved away. It was like being a child allowed to sit with adults but not permitted to speak. That night, as Jake looked out at the alien ships surrounding their tiny vessel, he wondered if coming to this summit had been a mistake. Humanity had hoped to join galactic civilization as equals, but it was becoming clear that equality was not what the established powers had in mind. The second day of negotiations began with what the aliens called technical discussions. Jake Morrison sat in the back of the Great Hall listening to conversations that made no sense to him. The alien species spoke about hyperspace lanes and resource allocation zones using terms that human translators could barely handle. Every few minutes, the translation devices would simply give up and emit frustrated beeping sounds when faced with concepts that had no human equivalent. Ambassador Crawford tried her best to follow along, but it was like watching a chess game where humans did not even know all the pieces or understand half the rules. The Altarians would make a statement about territorial boundaries, and the Vorthans would respond with something about crystalline growth patterns that somehow related to mining rights. The Khazari would buzz agreement in their unified voice while referencing hive expansion protocols that dated back thousands of years. Blake spent most of his time taking notes and trying to map out what was actually being discussed. As the human intelligence officer, he was supposed to understand the political implications of everything happening around them. But the more he listened, the more confused he became. Nothing about these negotiations felt like the diplomatic summits he had studied in human history. There was no real debate or disagreement between the alien species. They seemed to already know exactly what each of them wanted and how it would be divided. On the third day, something changed. Ryan was walking back to the human quarters when he took a wrong turn in the massive station corridors. The translation device on his collar was acting up again, randomly switching between languages as he passed different alien sections. He was trying to find his way back when he heard voices speaking in what sounded like standard galactic common, the trade language most species used when they did not want their conversations Translated, Ryan pressed himself against a wall and listened. His device was picking up fragments of conversation between what sounded like Altarian and Vorthan officials. The words were broken, but he could make out enough to understand they were discussing something called the implementation schedule. One voice mentioned Earth and resource extraction timelines. Another talked about civilization guidance protocols and behavioral modification procedures. His blood ran cold as he realized what he was hearing. These were not peace negotiations at all. This was a planning meeting for what would happen after the treaty was signed. The aliens were discussing how to manage and control human development, how to limit their expansion, and how to slowly reshape human society to fit galactic standards. Ryan managed to record several minutes of conversation before the voices moved away. He hurried back to the human quarters with his heart pounding. When he found Crawford and Morrison, they were reviewing the day's official proceedings, which had been full of polite discussions about mutual cooperation and shared prosperity. "We need to talk," Ryan said, activating a privacy screen around their small meeting area. "And we need to assume everything we say here is being monitored." He played back the recording he had made. The translation software struggled with alien languages but managed to provide enough context for the humans to understand what they were hearing. The aliens were not just planning to limit human expansion to a few worthless star systems. They were planning to slowly take control of human civilization itself. Crawford listened to the recording 3 times. Before speaking, her face had gone pale and her hands were shaking slightly. "This cannot be right," she said. "The preliminary documents we received promised equal partnership in galactic affairs." Ryan pulled out his portable computer and began showing them data he had been quietly collecting over the past 3 days. "I have been tracking communication patterns between the alien delegations," he said. "They are not negotiating with each other at all. Every major decision was made before this summit even began. This whole thing is theater designed to make it look legitimate when they announce their predetermined conclusions." Jake studied the data Ryan had gathered. Military training had taught him to look for patterns and inconsistencies, and what he was seeing made his stomach turn. "How long have you known about this?" he asked. "I started getting suspicious yesterday when I noticed the Altarian and Vorthan." "Delegations never actually disagreed about anything," Ryan said. "Real negotiations have conflict and compromise. These species are just taking turns announcing what they had already decided to do." Crawford was still staring at the translated fragments of conversation. "Civilization guidance protocols," she read out loud. "What does that mean exactly?" Ryan had been researching that exact question. "Based on the context and cross-referencing with galactic legal databases, it appears to be a system where advanced species can intervene in the affairs of younger civilizations whenever they determine it is necessary for galactic stability." "Intervene how?" Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Economic control first," Ryan explained. "Then political influence through what they call advisory councils. Eventually direct management of government, military, and educational systems. They have done this before." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Everything humans had hoped to gain from joining galactic civilization was an illusion. Instead of becoming part of a community of equals, Earth would become a managed territory under alien supervision. Crawford finally spoke. "How many other species have gone through this process?" Ryan had been investigating that question as well. The official galactic records were carefully edited, but he had found references to at least 15 other species that had joined the galactic community under similar treaties over the past 2,000 years. None of them were represented at this summit as independent powers. They existed as client states, protectorates, or economic zones controlled by the 12 dominant species. "What happened to the ones who refused?" Jake asked. That question had the most disturbing answer of all. Ryan had found records of 3 species that had rejected similar accords in the past 500 years. One had suffered mysterious technological failures that crippled their space program. Another had faced economic isolation until their government collapsed and was replaced by leaders more willing to cooperate. The third had simply stopped appearing in galactic records altogether. The message was clear. Species who joined the galactic community did so on terms dictated by the established powers, or they faced consequences that ranged from economic destruction to complete elimination. Crawford stood up and began pacing the small room. "We have to find a way out of this," she said. "There has to be some option we are not seeing." Jake was studying the recording again. "When is the final signing ceremony scheduled?" "Tomorrow morning," Crawford replied. "All species representatives are expected to formally accept the accords in front of a galaxy-wide broadcast. It is supposed to be a historic moment of universal cooperation." Ryan was already working on his computer again. "I'm trying to find out if there have ever been any exceptions to this process," he said. "Any species that managed to negotiate different terms or found another way to handle this situation?" The data was not encouraging. Every species that had attended one of these summits over the past 3,000 years had eventually signed the accords presented to them. The established galactic powers had perfected a system that made refusal seem impossible and submission seemed like the only logical choice. As the three humans sat in their small quarters surrounded by alien technology and alien power, the weight of their situation pressed down on them like a physical force. Tomorrow they would have to make a choice that would determine the future of every human being in the galaxy. They could sign a treaty that would slowly strangle human independence, or they could refuse and face the combined might of 12 ancient civilizations. Neither option offered any real hope for human freedom. The morning of the final signing ceremony arrived like a death sentence. Jake Morrison had not slept at all during the night. He stood at the small window in his quarters looking out at the alien fleet that surrounded their tiny ship. Each of those vessels carried enough firepower to destroy Earth's entire defense force without breaking stride. The message was clear even without words. Resistance was not just futile. It was suicidal. Ambassador Crawford had called an emergency meeting 2 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The 4 human representatives sat around a small table that seemed pathetically tiny compared to the Grand Council chambers where their fate would be decided. The weight of representing all humanity pressed down on them like a physical force. "I have been thinking about this all night," Crawford sighed, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "We have 3 options. We can sign the treaty and hope we can find ways to protect human independence from within the system. We can refuse to sign and face whatever consequences they have in store for us. Or we can try to negotiate some kind of middle ground." "Ryan." Blake shook his head. "There is no middle ground," he said. "I spent the whole night going through every piece of data I could access. This system has been in place for thousands of years. No species has ever successfully negotiated different terms. The established powers do not compromise because they do not have to." Dr. Martinez had been quiet throughout the crisis, but now she spoke up. "What if we simply walk away? Just leave the summit and return to Earth without signing anything?" "That would be the same as refusing," Jake said. "These species do not accept neutrality. You are either part of their system or you are a threat to it. There is no option to just be left alone." Crawford spread out copies of the treaty documents across the table. The terms looked reasonable on the surface, full of language about mutual cooperation and shared benefits. But after understanding what the aliens really meant by those words, every paragraph felt like a trap designed to slowly strangle human freedom. "The ceremony begins in 90 minutes, Crawford said. "Representatives from 12 species will be watching, along with billions of their citizens across the galaxy. Whatever we do will be seen by every advanced civilization in known space." Jake had been studying military history his entire career, and he knew that sometimes the most important battles were fought not for victory but for principle. "What happens if we just tell the truth?" he asked. "What if we stand up in front of everyone and explain what this treaty really means?" "They would never let us," Ryan said. "The moment we started talking about their real plans, they would cut off our communication or have us removed from the chamber." Crawford was looking at the treaty documents again. "Unless we were already recognized to speak," she said slowly. Each delegation is scheduled to make a brief statement before the signing. It is supposed to be a ceremonial acceptance of the terms, but technically we could say whatever we wanted during that time. And then what? Dr. Martinez asked. Even if we expose their deception, what changes? We are still one small species facing 12 galactic empires. Jake stood up and walked to the window again. The alien ships hung in space like sleeping giants, beautiful and terrible at the same time. Maybe nothing changes, he said. But at least the galaxy will know that humans chose to stand up rather than kneel down. The debate continued for another hour, but deep down they all knew what choice they would make. Humans had never been good at accepting slavery, even when it was disguised as protection or guidance. From the first farmers who refused to pay tribute to distant kings to the colonies that declared independence from empires, humanity had a long tradition of choosing dangerous freedom over comfortable submission, with 30 minutes remaining. Before the ceremony, Crawford made their decision official. We will attend the ceremony and deliver our statement as scheduled. We will expose what this treaty really means and formally reject it on behalf of all humanity. After that, whatever happens will happen. They spent the remaining time preparing their final message. Crawford would deliver the main statement explaining what they had discovered about the true nature of the Accords. But they all agreed that Jake should deliver the final refusal. As a military officer, he understood better than anyone what they were choosing and what it would cost. The walk to the great assembly hall felt like walking to their own execution. Aliens lined the corridors, many of them pointing at the humans, and speaking in languages the translation devices could not handle. Jake could feel their amusement and contempt. To them, this ceremony was just a formality before adding another species to their collection of subject worlds. The assembly hall had been transformed for the signing ceremony. Massive screens showed the event being broadcast across the galaxy. Representatives from billions of worlds were watching as 12 species prepared to sign the most comprehensive peace treaty in galactic history. The human delegation was seated in a section clearly marked as observers rather than full participants. The ceremony began with speeches from each of the major powers. The Altarian Prime Minister spoke about bringing order and stability to chaotic regions of the galaxy. The Vorthan speaker discussed the benefits of shared knowledge and coordinated development. The Khazari Queen explained how unity of purpose would eliminate the waste and conflict that had held back galactic progress for centuries. Each speech was carefully crafted to make the treaty sound like a gift to younger species rather than a tool for their control. The language was full of noble concepts about guidance, cooperation, and mutual benefit. No one mentioned the civilization, guidance protocols, or the resource extraction schedules, or the behavioral modification procedures that Ryan had overheard. When the speeches ended, it was time for each delegation to make their formal acceptance. The smaller species went first, their representatives delivering brief statements about being honored to join such a distinguished alliance. Their words sounded hollow and rehearsed, as if they were reading from scripts they had been given. Finally, it was humanity's turn. Crawford stood up and walked to the central podium. The great hall fell silent as she activated the translation system that would carry her words to every world in the galaxy. Jake could see confusion on some alien faces as they realized the human ambassador was not carrying the prepared acceptance speech. Distinguished representatives of galactic civilization, Crawford began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. I stand before you today not to celebrate the signing of this treaty, but to expose the deception it represents. A murmur of surprise rippled through the alien delegates. This was not what anyone had expected from the humans. Crawford continued speaking, laying out everything they had discovered about the true nature of the Accords. She explained the hidden clauses, the historical pattern of subjugation, and the systematic elimination of species that had dared to refuse. As she spoke, Jake watched the reactions around the hall. Some aliens looked genuinely shocked, as if they had not fully understood what their governments were planning. Others appeared angry that their carefully constructed facade was being stripped away in front of the entire galaxy. the major power. Delegates were clearly furious but trying to maintain diplomatic composure. When Crawford finished her revelation, she stepped back from the podium and nodded to Jake. It was time for humanity's final answer. Jake Morrison walked to the podium with steady steps, even though his heart was pounding like a drum in his chest. The entire galaxy was watching through the broadcast screens, and he could feel the weight of billions of eyes on him. Behind him sat the representatives of 12 ancient civilizations that could destroy humanity with a single command. Ahead of him lay a choice that would determine whether humans remained free or became slaves dressed up as partners, the Great Assembly. Hall had fallen completely silent after Crawford's shocking revelation. Alien delegates sat frozen in their seats, unsure how to respond to such unprecedented honesty in what was supposed to be a ceremonial formality. The Altarian Prime Minister kept looking at his advisors as if expecting them to tell him how to handle this situation. The Vorthan speaker's crystal formation was flickering with colors that the human translation devices could not interpret. The Khazari Queen's unified voice had gone completely quiet for the first time since the summit began. Jake reached the podium and looked out at the assembled representatives. These beings had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years through a system built on deception and intimidation. They had convinced dozens of species to surrender their freedom in exchange for the illusion of partnership and protection. Now, for the first time in their long history, someone was calling them out in front of the entire galaxy. "My name is Captain Jake Morrison of the Terran Federation," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems to every corner of known space. "I have spent my career studying human history, particularly the moments when ordinary people faced impossible choices between freedom and survival." The alien delegates were starting to recover from their shock. Jake could see several of them activating private communication devices, probably coordinating their response to this unexpected challenge to their authority. But the broadcast was live and being transmitted to billions of worlds. Whatever happened next would be seen by every advanced civilization in the galaxy. Throughout human history, we have faced empires that claim to offer us peace and prosperity. In exchange for our submission, Jake continued, we have been told again and again that resistance is futile, that the powerful are too strong to oppose, that we should be grateful for whatever scraps of dignity they allow us to keep. The Altarian Prime Minister stood up abruptly. "This is highly inappropriate," he declared, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to instant obedience. The human delegation was invited here to participate in a historic moment of galactic unity, not to spread divisive propaganda. Jake turned to face the Altarian directly. Was the Roman Empire offering unity when it demanded tribute from every nation it could reach? Was the British Empire spreading peace when it planted its flag on every continent? Were any of the great powers in human history really interested in partnership, or were they simply looking for more sophisticated ways to control those who were weaker than them? A murmur of discomfort rippled through the alien delegates. The historical references meant nothing to them, but the tone was unmistakable. This human was not showing the proper respect for established authority. He was speaking to galactic powers as if they were equals, or worse, as if they were the problem rather than the solution. The Vorthan speaker's crystalline form pulsed with agitated energy. "Your species has been spacefaring for barely 3 centuries, it said in a voice like breaking glass. Our civilizations have maintained galactic peace and stability for millennia. What could humans possibly know about governance on an interstellar scale?" Jake smiled grimly. "We know what it looks like when someone offers you peace at the cost of your freedom," he said. "We know what it sounds like when powerful people explain why you should be grateful to serve them. We know what it feels like to be told that our independence is less important than their convenience." The Khazari Queen finally spoke, her billions of voices creating an eerie harmony. "Resistance to the collective will is illogical," she stated. "Individual desires must be subordinated to the greater good. This is the foundation of all advanced civilization." "That is where you are wrong," Jake replied, his voice growing stronger. "Individual desires, individual choices, individual courage, To stand up and say no when everyone else is bowing down, that is the foundation of everything worth preserving in this universe. By now, several of the major power delegates were on their feet, demanding that Jake be removed from the podium. But the broadcast was still running, and species across the galaxy were watching this unprecedented confrontation. Some of the smaller alien delegations in the hall were leaning forward, listening intently to words they had never heard spoken to the galactic powers before. Jake raised his voice above the growing chaos. "I want to tell you about a place called Earth," he said. "It is a small world with one yellow star, inhabited by a species that has never learned to accept slavery no matter how politely it is offered to them." The hall was erupting now. Alien delegates were shouting in dozens of languages while their translation devices struggled to keep up. Security forces were moving toward the podium, but Jake kept speaking, his words cutting through the noise like a sword through silk. "We are farmers who faced emperors and won. We are colonists who declared independence from the most powerful empire in our history and made it stick. We are ordinary people who looked at systems designed to crush them and decided to stand up anyway, not because we thought we could win, but because some things are more important than winning." The Altarian Prime Minister was gesturing frantically at his security forces. "Remove this human immediately," he ordered. "This ceremony will proceed according to established protocols." Jake saw the alien security personnel approaching, but he was not finished yet. "You want to know what humans have learned in our short time among the stars?" he said, his voice carrying over the chaos. "We have learned that freedom is not something you can negotiate away piece by piece in exchange for comfort and safety. We have learned that dignity is not something you can trade for protection from bullies. We have learned that sometimes the only choice that matters is the choice to remain who you are, no matter what the cost." The security forces reached the podium, but Jake stepped back toward his delegation. The cameras were still running, and his words were still being transmitted across the galaxy. "The Terran Federation formally rejects these accords and any claim to authority over human worlds," he declared in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall. "We thank you for this education in galactic politics, but we choose to remain free." Crawford, Ryan, and Dr. Martinez stood up as Jake rejoined them. The four humans walked toward the exit as the alien delegates erupted in outrage behind them. 12 civilizations that had never faced defiance from a subject species watched in stunned disbelief as humanity simply walked away from their carefully constructed system of control. As they reached the hall's exit, Jake turned back one final time. The assembly had descended into chaos as delegates argued about how to respond to this unprecedented situation. "Find us when you are ready to negotiate as equals," he called out. "Until then, we have a galaxy to explore." The human delegation left the Great Hall as the galaxy watched in silence, unsure of what they had just witnessed or what it would mean for the future of interstellar civilization. The human shuttle left the diplomatic station in complete silence. Jake Morrison sat in the pilot's seat watching the alien fleet that surrounded them, waiting for the weapons fire that would end humanity's brief moment of defiance. Behind him, Crawford, Ryan, and Dr. Martinez prepared for what they all believed would be their final moments. The UFS Enterprise waited at the edge of the formation, tiny and fragile compared to the massive alien warships that could destroy it with a single shot, but the attack never came. Instead, something far more unexpected happened. As news of the human rejection spread across the galaxy's communication networks, other species began to respond in ways that shocked the established powers. The broadcast of Jake's speech had been transmitted to every corner of known space, and billions of beings had heard words that no one had spoken to galactic authority in thousands of years. The first response came from the Nexari homeworld, a species that had been reduced to servant status over 2 millennia ago. Their planetary council issued a statement demanding immediate renegotiation of their treaties with the Altarian Empire. For the first time in 2,000 years, the Nexari were refusing to accept their assigned role in the galactic hierarchy. Their message was simple and direct. If humans could say no to the established powers, then so could they. Within hours, the rebellion spread. The aquatic Delphinians, who had been forced to allow mining operations in their star systems for centuries, suddenly declared all extraction permits void. Their ocean worlds went silent, cutting off communication with the species that had been exploiting their resources. The energy beings of the Outer Rim, who had served as living power sources for alien technology, simply vanished from their assigned positions across dozens of worlds. Jake watched the reports flooding in through the Enterprise's communication systems. Species after species was following humanity's example, not by making grand speeches or dramatic gestures, but by simply refusing to continue accepting their subjugation. The galaxy's established order was crumbling as subject peoples realized that the Emperor had no clothes. The 12 major powers tried desperately to maintain control. The Altarian Empire dispatched fleets to force compliance from rebellious worlds. The Vorthan Collective attempted to use their advanced technology to override the communication systems that were spreading word of the uprising. The Khazari sent their unified swarms to restore order through sheer numbers and coordination, but something fundamental had changed. For thousands of years, the galactic hierarchy had been maintained through the belief that resistance was impossible. Every species had accepted their place because they believed they had no choice. Jake's simple act of walking away had shattered that belief across the entire galaxy. If one small primitive species could say no to 12 ancient empires, then anyone could. The first major victory came when the Delphinian Confederation announced that 3 Altarian fleets had been forced to withdraw from their territories. The aquatic species had not fought the invaders directly. Instead, they had simply made it impossible for the alien ships to function in their water-rich systems. Life support systems failed, navigation equipment malfunctioned, and weapons systems shut down when exposed to the unique energy fields that Delphinians could generate in their home waters. Other species began developing their own forms of resistance. The rock-like Lithians, who had been treated as living mining equipment for centuries, began systematically sabotaging the extraction operations they had been forced to maintain. The gas giant dwellers, who had served as atmospheric processors for terraforming projects, simply stopped working, leaving half-completed worlds sterile and useless. Jake found himself at the center of a revolution he had never intended to start. Messages poured in from across the galaxy, species asking for guidance or support, or simply wanting to thank humanity for showing them that resistance was possible. The small human delegation was completely unprepared for their new role as symbols of galactic freedom. "This is not what we planned," Crawford said as she reviewed the latest reports. "We just wanted to maintain human independence. We never meant to start a galaxy-wide uprising." Ryan was monitoring communication intercepts from the major powers. Their carefully coordinated system was falling apart as they struggled to maintain control over dozens of rebellious worlds simultaneously. "The established powers are in complete chaos," he reported. "They have never faced coordinated resistance from multiple species before. Their entire system was designed to handle one problem at a time, not a galaxy-wide revolution." Dr. Martinez had been studying the historical parallels. "This is exactly what happens when any oppressive system is challenged," she said. "The moment people realize they do not have to accept their circumstances, the whole structure becomes unstable." The 12 powers maintained control through the illusion that their authority was inevitable. Jake destroyed that illusion with a few words. 5 years passed before the situation stabilized. During that time, the galaxy transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The old system of 12 dominant powers ruling over dozens of subject species completely collapsed. Some of the established civilizations tried to maintain their empires through military force, but they discovered that ruling unwilling subjects across interstellar distances was nearly impossible when those subjects refused to cooperate. The Altarian Empire fragmented into smaller regional governments as their subject worlds declared independence. The Vorthan Collective found that their advanced technology meant nothing when other species refused to trade with them or provide the raw materials their systems needed. The Khazari Hive discovered that perfect coordination was useless when they could no longer count on other species to follow their directives. In the end, it was economics rather than warfare that forced the major powers to accept the new reality. Galactic civilization was too interconnected for any one species to maintain control through force alone. Trade routes collapsed, resource extraction stopped, and technological development slowed to a crawl as the careful balance of exploitation was disrupted. The solution came from an unexpected source. The Nexari, who had been the first to follow humanity's example, proposed a new form of galactic governance based on voluntary cooperation rather than hierarchical control. Instead of treaties that bound weaker species to serve stronger ones, they suggested agreements between equals that could be modified or terminated by any party at any time. Jake found himself sitting at a very different negotiating table 5 years after walking out of the original summit. The same diplomatic station orbited the same neutral world, but everything else had changed. Instead of 12 dominant powers dictating terms to dozens of subject species, 47 civilizations met as equals to discuss the formation of the Galactic Cooperative Alliance. The new accords were everything the original treaty had pretended to be. Trade agreements that benefited all parties. Defense pacts based on mutual support rather than protection rackets. Cultural exchanges that celebrated diversity instead of demanding conformity. Most importantly, every species retained the right to withdraw from any agreement that no longer served their interests. Admiral Jake Morrison, as he was now known, represented humanity in these new negotiations, not as a supplicant hoping for scraps of dignity, but as an equal partner in building a better future for all galactic civilizations. The established powers still possessed their advanced technology and vast resources, but they had learned what humanity had always understood, that true strength came not from the ability to dominate others, but from the courage to stand up for what was right even when the odds seemed impossible. As Jake looked around the negotiating table at representatives from species that had once been slaves, servants, and subjects, he realized that sometimes the most important victories were won not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through the simple act of refusing to kneel when everyone expected you to bow. The galaxy had watched in silence as one human stood up, and in doing so had changed the course of interstellar history forever.